Now, the next two speakers will share a presentation. Leading off will be Cathy Robinson, followed by Lydia Dobson. Now, Cathy is Executive Director of the Elizabeth Fry Society of Ottawa. She has a BA in Social and Urban Geography and a Master's in Public Policy and Administration. Now, Cathy's previously run a busy consulting practice that focused on developing and communicating public policy, primarily at the federal level. She was involved in Canada's first Young Offenders Act and has provided consulting services to over 20 government departments and agencies and numerous national not-for-profit organizations. She'll be followed by Lydia, who is an associate member of the board of the Elizabeth Fry Society in Ottawa. She is completing her final year of studies and will graduate from Osgoode Hall Law School later this year. Lydia is articling with the law firm of Koski Minsky, LLP, which has taken on the majority of prisoner-related class actions in Ontario over the past decade. She's also acted as the legal coordinator for the jail hotline, which services prisoners at the Ottawa Carleton Detention Centre. So I invite you both to unmute yourselves, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Victor. And thanks very much, Vanessa, for that very powerful presentation, and Laura as well. So we're going to see some duplication here because we're supporting each other in pointing out in various ways I'm going to say from a public policy perspective, because that's my background, the foolishness and mistake of investing in a solution that does not match a problem or problems that we have. And I'm going to try to hit a line and adjust some of what I said to pick up on what we've heard from both Laura and Vanessa. The Elizabeth Fry Society of Ottawa provides support to and advocates for women who are criminalized, have been criminalized, and who may become criminalized or recriminalized. So all of our clients, whether they are in one of our two residences or in our community programs, have something to do with the justice system. And our work is to support them by advocating for them and otherwise supporting what they need. So our approximately 40 staff and some 80 volunteers, we do our work with women and gender diverse individuals and some men in a variety of settings. So we have two residences. One is a bail house, and Laura talked about women on remand waiting for sentencing. So we have women from OCDC who are low risk, women who are able to, we provide surety for them while they're on bail and they reside in our bail residence. We also have a transition house for women who are exiting or on parole or probation or otherwise exiting federal prisons and provincial jails. We also have staff who provide addictions counseling, housing support, very challenging in this current housing crisis, and very challenging because anyone who has been criminalized and has a criminal record is not at the top of anyone's list for housing, regardless of what they have been convicted of. We also have a staff person who works in the jail in OCDC, which Vanessa described her experience there. And we have a staff who works in the Ottawa Courthouse and also in Lorneal Courthouse. So we're all over the place on this issue. And what I just want to describe to you is who are our criminalized clients and why jail is not the solution for them or for any community who is thinking about having a jail in their community. So as Vanessa eloquently put in her poem and in the rest of her presentation, we experienced this as well. Most of our criminalized clients are women who have been charged or convicted with nonviolent crimes that we might understand best as survival crimes, such as theft. They might not be exactly survival crimes, but they may be involved in a gang, sometimes without even knowing it, by carrying drugs or weapons. There are also people who have experienced physical, emotional, and/or sexual abuse, who may have been parented, for example, by survivors of residential schools, who themselves have been traumatized and have not had the parenting experience they need to parent as fully as they would like to. Our clients are people who have addictions, people who have mental health challenges, who have disabilities, developmental disabilities, physical disabilities, people who are poor and may not be able to feed, clothe, house their families. People are homeless or experience precarious housing. People have experienced trauma, often repeatedly. And I want to point out that many of our clients are mothers, and through incarceration, they are isolated from their families. And heartbreakingly, most experience extreme difficulties reconnecting and rebuilding relationships with their families. So we see our clients through some of the most difficult times in their lives, before, during, and following incarceration, as they seek to get their lives back together, or to a place that they want to be at. Nothing that we see as a staff of 40, volunteers of 80, tells us that a single client has, does, or will benefit from incarceration. Instead, what we see firsthand every day is that clients who are incarcerated at OCDC and other provincial jails and federal prisons experience extreme isolation. They're cut off from any supports they may have had. They tend to have few visits. They have difficulty even making phone calls. Think Bell Canada. They can't afford the cost of phone calls. They also experience abuse, and I'm not going to attempt to describe further what Vanessa has described, horrific abuse. And significantly, they experience the absence of supports they need. And we've heard this both from Vanessa and from Laura. They need, the supports they need to address what led them here in the first place, what was causing some of their challenges to start with, not to be incarcerated for that. So that they're not getting the mental health supports they need. They're not getting help with substance use. They're not getting help with housing or how to address poverty. What they get is a cell, and whether it's a fancy new jail or an old rundown place that nobody would want to step into, a cell is a cell, and it's run by corrections to correct. So if what people need is mental health, support with substance use, support with trauma, we shouldn't be putting them in a jail. A cell does not and cannot meet the needs of our clients or any human being. It leaves them worse off when they get out of the community. So I just want to leave you with a picture. Imagine one of our clients today stepping out of jail after 18 months in jail. The clothes on her back, no ID, no housing, no family in town, no anything. Is that person, is that human being, that mother, sister, partner, rehabilitated, a contributing member of society? What are her choices? So I invite you all to advocate for what your community really needs, not to build another jail. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Laura now. I'm going to turn it over to Lydia now. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm just going to piggyback on a lot of the things that Cathy, Laura, and Vanessa have already told us. So Cathy describes a lot of the reasons that we at EFRI are not in support of the construction of the jail. And I'm going to speak more broadly to the need for decarceration and all of the ways that corrections in Ontario have let us down over the past few decades. So before I start, I just want to make a note on language and some of the terms that I might use. So when I talk about women and gender diverse individuals, I'm also including trans men and trans women. And I also want to note that some of the topics that I might discuss will also include violence against women. So if that is triggering for anyone, you might want to take a break right now. And before I begin, I think it's really important to acknowledge the role that race plays in our current prison industrial context in Canada. So Black, Indigenous, and racialized people are vastly overrepresented in these systems. And this is what many of us view as an ongoing reproduction of colonialism and racism. So when we look at the numbers, for example, of Indigenous women, they are the fastest growing prison population in Canada, which has a lot to do with systemic shortcomings and violence and colonialism against Indigenous communities, as Cathy alluded to earlier. So in my presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the pathways that lead to incarceration. I'll expand a bit on the conditions of confinement that we're seeing here in Ontario, and go into what's been called the crisis in corrections, and finally just talk a little bit about the barriers and the issues that women and folks who have been incarcerated face on release. So it's really important to note that a lot of the women that are incarcerated have or are experiencing violence, abuse, poverty, mental health issues, and are drug users. And so oftentimes these are the folks who are becoming criminalized in their most vulnerable moments. And so experts have told us again and again that our carceral system is oftentimes seeking to arrest women whose charges are related to fleeing abusive situations. So I have a statistic here that 82% of federally sentenced women became criminalized through a process of leaving an abusive situation. Similarly, women who experience poverty and homelessness, which is also often related to leaving intimate partner violence, are far more vulnerable and visible to policing. So we know that for many, mental health issues can stem from experiences of violence and trauma, but whatever the cause is, people who are experiencing violence, abuse, poverty, and mental health issues, they deserve to be supported. And so putting people in jails as a way of supporting them, it simply isn't doing that. What we heard from Vanessa was a horrific account of just the absolute opposite of what people who are vulnerable and need help should be receiving. So when we look at what's being accomplished by incarcerating women in Ontario, we can see that there aren't these goals of rehabilitation, of support, or of public safety really being met. So again, going back to what Vanessa said, the vast majority of women who are incarcerated are there as a result of very low risk, very minor issues that would be much better suited to be supported rather than punished. And so, as Laura, Cathy, and Vanessa have all noted the impacts of this regime that seeks to punish women not only hurts the women by not supporting them, but it also hurts their families, their children. It disadvantages children of incarcerated women. It disadvantages their broader families. And so we know that the majority of women who are incarcerated are actually mothers. And of those mothers, 90% of them prior to incarceration were primary caregivers. So this is having a vast impact on communities across Canada and in Ontario as well. So when we talk about the conditions of confinement, I just want to go through some of the recent cases that we've seen coming out of jails, specifically in Ottawa and in Ontario. So a lot of issues were talked about by Vanessa already. So basic health care is a problem. Women who are incarcerated are no longer provided OHIP. This not just women, anyone who's incarcerated. And so their healthcare falls under the Ministry of Corrections, which is not the ministry's purpose, right? And so we're seeing subpar, inadequate healthcare basic necessities not being provided, safety measures not being followed. And these are just core necessities, but the idea of having meaningful programming that would lead to rehabilitation, that would support someone with mental health, those are not even thought of in a lot of situations. Those are absolutely sorely lacking in Ontario-based jails and prisons. And so Ontario, in addition to all of these issues, has a terrible track record of human rights violations and conditions of confinement that violate international conventions against torture. So specifically, I'm talking about the Mandela Rules here, which is a United Nations convention that Canada is a signatory on. So in 2012, the Christina settlement order was released by the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal after a woman who was living with cancer and mental health issues spent more than 280 days in a cell the size of a closet. During this time, she missed cancer treatments. Obviously, her mental health issues were vastly exacerbated. Her family couldn't reach her. They had to go to great lengths to have her released. And so Ms. Jean has since passed away, but the order that resulted from her case has actually, so since 2012, 2 times now, the ministry has been found to have been in violation of this order, which states that you should not be putting people with mental health issues in segregation. So despite these legal claims coming forward, we're still seeing the same problems repeating themselves. We're not seeing corrections getting better. As Laura mentioned earlier, we're being promised these newer, different models, but that's not what's actually being provided. In 2018, Julie Bellotta settled her lawsuit against the jail for neglect that she received when she gave birth to what was her first child at age 26. Julie knew that she was in labor. She told the guards that she was in labor. She was not brought to a hospital. She was not even let out of her cell. And so she was forced to give birth in the cell in the jail. As a result of inadequate health care and supports, Julie lost her child a year later. We saw in 2020, so just last year in the summer, the women at the Ottawa Correctional Detention Centre partook in a hunger strike, which was striking for demands like just basic healthcare needs, hygiene products, release supports, things so that they could better integrate on release. And so even now we're looking at those demands, and a lot of them have not meaningfully actually been met. So that's just to paint a picture of sort of what's happening in there and how, even though there's all these legal challenges, a lot of the conditions are not changing. And so while the government might suggest that building a newer jail will resolve these shortcomings, we know that this isn't the case. Building more cages to take and punish people who are already so vulnerable in our communities is just reproducing trauma and harm again and again. So even in addition to a lot of human rights-based advocacy groups and community groups talking about the problems in corrections and in jails, even the guard union that represents the guards who benefit from the production and building of more jails, they've noted that there's this crisis in corrections. They've launched a campaign that aims to bring awareness to the experiences of correctional officers with respect to staffing shortages, post-traumatic stress disorder, high caseloads, safety concerns, mental health issues, and these are what the guards are experiencing. So you can imagine that these are the folks who can go home to their families at the end of the day. If that's what they're experiencing, imagine the people who are there 24/7. And so just during the pandemic, there's been a lot of different issues around staffing of the prisons. We're seeing there be lockdowns because of short staffing. And so these are not problems that will be resolved with a new building. What we need to see is decarceration. We need to see these people who are vulnerable and who are in need of support being supported in our communities. And so a lot of times, what a lot of the women were striking for last summer was to have better accesses to the supports that they need on release. So to have access to family services, to be able to find housing, to be able to have mental health support. But instead, what happens when women and when anyone becomes criminalized is you become a part of this system, which then, as Cathy noted, makes it more difficult to make a rental application or to apply for a job when you have to check that box that says that you've been convicted of a crime. And so these systems are just reproducing the same problems again and again. And so instead of punishing people who need our support, what we need to be doing is directing community funds into the community and actually supporting each other to prevent these pathways to incarceration. Thank you.